guys. Okay, so this is the last part of chapter 11, which I was going to do in class, but what I want to do is I'm going to do the screencast on this piece of it, and as you watch it, if you watch it, I would like you to write down 2 to 3 questions or comments that you have, either questions that you have about the information that you'd like to understand more, or comments that you have that add to the information or are connected to a personal experience around this kind of stuff that you have, something that adds to it. So write those down as you go or when you've finished and bring them to class on Tuesday. I know on Tuesday you have your papers, your 1-page double-spaced parenting mini paper due. I realize that, and but I hope you can take a little bit of time for this. All right, so I'm going to put me in the corner. Oh, I am down there. Oh, I need some feedback too. Would you prefer just not to see me and just hear my voice as we go through this? Do you see me in the corner or not? So you can let me know. Okay, so children with special needs we're going to talk about. We talked about measuring the mind and intelligence and multiple intelligences with Sternberg's 3, academic, creative, and practical, and his shaping, adapting, and selecting. And also we talked about, what's his name? Gardner's intelligences and his 9 types, which I'm hoping that you can also find a little bit of time to do that personal assessment, at least to answer the questions for yourself. All that is optional. That is optional for sure. But now we're talking about children with special needs in this the 6 to 11 time period. As they go to school, some of these things start to expose themselves more. Developmental psychopathology is, what people study to link typical development with the study of disorders. So we look at what's normal, typical, neurotypical, and then what kind of veers away from that one way or another. Now, comorbid, I think, is an important term because it talks about the fact that there might be 2 or more unrelated disease conditions at the same time. Now, I think that can sometimes confuse things and make it difficult, especially in these 6 to 11s. It's really hard, I think, to get good diagnosis on a lot of stuff when children are 6 to 11 because there can be a lot of things going on developmentally. At home, so many different things can look like other things. So children with special needs, a couple of things, lessons that they want you to keep in mind is that most people sometimes act oddly, but still may not have a disorder. So we have to also remember that a norm is it's that average, that general space, and that we all can fall in different places along that continuum. And that especially as children are growing, they can outgrow some things. Things can change over time, that we have plasticity, that not everything is like a lifetime disability. So let's look at a few of these. We talked today in our wonderful impact presentation about ADD, ADHD. Here's just a little bit of information that I have. It might look a little bit different from what we looked at today. That's okay. I think that sometimes you can find different resources that have different things. A condition in which a person is inattentive, impulsive, overactive, great difficulty concentrating. So what I've found at the National Institute of Mental Health is that approximately 11% of children between 4 and 17, 6.4 million, have been diagnosed as of 2011. That it's going up, 7.8 in 2003 to 11% in 2011. That it increases about 3% per year from 97 to 2006. You can read these numbers, boys more than girls. Average diagnosis around age 7. So you can read some of this, but it's changes by state. Low in Nevada, high in Kentucky. We know what those numbers mean. We could talk about that, see what you think about that. As many as 17.5% of children with current ADHD were not receiving either medication for ADHD or mental health counseling in 2011. And you'll remember with me, I think that the two go hand in hand, medication and counseling, or at least medication and skill building when it comes to something like ADHD. Can we teach kids skills in ways to train their brains for more attention. If neuroplasticity is real, and we know that mindfulness works on parts of the brain for attention, and that it's all about attention, can we train children and can we train brains for better focus without medicating? It's at least, I think, worth the effort and the skill shaping around that. So this might be a big one with different questions. We have talked about it. We see more ADD in girls, but it doesn't get diagnosed, I don't think, near as much as the ADHD, because the ADHD is so obvious, a lot more obvious. Now, what I will say personally around this, I think it is a personal question. I do think that you have to look at an individual kid, look at different options, different ways. Is it a different learning style? Is it something that needs medicating? I have a friend with a son with ADHD, lots of testing, neurotesting, and things like this to show it. I do think the testing is important, not to in any way let medication come without lots of testing. But what they found when he was young is his behavior could be dangerous to himself because he wouldn't listen. And he would do things that were a little impulsive and dangerous if he wasn't on medication. But they didn't necessarily like the way the medication was for him either. So, one thing she has done is she's gotten him in swimming. Because swimming is such a both sides of the brain, sort of bilateral kind of movement, it's been shown that things like this, and I think, different activities, really good for ADHD. So he's been swimming for many years competitively, and the energy release, the action, all these kinds of things, but also I think that particular type of movement is good. Anyway, all worth looking into if it becomes necessary. So bipolar is another one the book talks about. Extreme mood swings not caused by outside experiences. Tends to run in families. Some research has suggested that some people with certain genes are more likely to develop than others. MRI study found that brain's prefrontal cortex in adults with bipolar tends to be smaller and function less well compared to adults who don't have bipolar. There are two kinds, the two kinds I'm going to mention here. Bipolar 1, manic or mixed episodes that last at least 7 days, or by manic symptoms that are so severe that the person needs immediate hospital care. Depressive episodes occur as well. Bipolar 2, defined by a pattern of depressive episodes and hypomanic episodes, but not full-blown mania. So bipolar 2 is more of a depressive and less of a manic. Bipolar 1 can be mixed episodes of manic and depressive that have to last certain times. Bipolar 2, and then there's a rapid cycling type where it can be in a day. It can be over quick time periods that it can go from manic to depressive to manic to depressive. I think, again, bipolar is one that it can occur in children. We really don't see a whole lot of diagnosis. I think diagnosis for this type of thing, for schizophrenia, bipolar, these they take longer when a child is this young because they can look like ADHD. They could look like other developmental milestones and so forth. To really name something and label someone with bipolar at that young of an age, it needs to be very clear with a lot of testing. Because, again, the comorbidity of things, anxiety or depression, and then what we can also see is that it's like undiagnosed autism can then bring on anxiety and depression and might mask itself. And bipolar and autism are ones that can actually be confused for each other sometimes. So that can be the issue with these. So learning disabilities, marked delay in a particular area of learning, not caused by an apparent physical disability or mental retardation or by an unusually stressful environment. So it's more of a processing issue within the brain of certain types of learning. The book, I think, mostly talks about dyslexia, and we hear about this one a lot, unusual difficulty with reading, and it's kind of the processing of letters. Dysgraphia is one we don't hear a lot about, so I wanted to add it in here. It's a condition that causes trouble with written expression, so you can't read the handwriting. I have a friend with a son whose IQ is probably over 170, and yet he has dysgraphia. So, okay, I got to pause for just a second. Sorry about that little pause. So my friend's son, very, 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 very profoundly gifted, but has dysgraphia. So if you just saw his writing, you would be concerned about this child and his cognitive capacities. But he learned to type, and that's great for him. So it's not one that's dealt with as much, but it's certainly out there. And then we have autism and the autistic spectrum disorder. They took out the term Asperger's syndrome in the last DSM, the DSM-5. It's now just the autistic spectrum disorder. Not sure why. Inability to relate to other people normally, extreme self-absorption, and inability to acquire normal speech. So this is a wide, deep, and long spectrum that I have talked some about in class already. Asperger's was always the one that was, we see as the high-functioning Sheldon types, or what Asperger actually, German, himself called his little scientists, his little professors. And that they would speak as professors. Their vocabularies could be impressive. They would have great focus on one particular area, but they might have other eccentricities or issues. And mostly, the things that we see over and over and over again with any of these children is social deficits, difficulty making and maintaining friendships, maintaining eye contact, so social deficits. But they can have extreme gifts in other areas. And so autism, because it's such a wide spectrum, can often be misdiagnosed as other things, or other things as this. So it's one, I may talk a little bit more about this because I think the story of Asperger is very interesting too, and is up for debate to some extent. Asperger and Connor were two men who discovered autism, or named it, at the same time but on different parts of the planet and not in connection with each other. So their stories are pretty interesting, and I've shared with you the book Neurotribes for those who might be specifically interested in this and in the history of it. But it's something that with neurodiversity is still, that is still evolving. How do we define this? How do we look at children or people? How do we look at it? How do we find the resources? Because a little bit like ADHD, which again, another thing that can be confused sometimes, with ADHD and just like with autism, is it neurodiversity? And so it just needs to be, it's a matter of resources and changing structures, or is it something to be cured, which is how we've looked at both for so long. So I think that's interesting. One thing I'm adding under this, yes, it's a kind of a personal edition because it's things I've had to do with my own son, but also I think it's something that can go misunderstood a lot. So this is about gifted children, and those are those over the 130 mark on the IQ. We often think of them just as really smart kids, but, and I'm just going to say this briefly because this isn't even really in the book, but there was a man, Dabrowski, who's a Polish psychiatrist and psychologist, and he has a theory around this, and he called them the Dabrowski sensitivities. Actually 6. I'm not sure what the 6th one is. But psychomotor, sensual overexcitability, intellectual, imaginational, and emotional. And if you look at, so for example, psychomotor overexcitability, it can essentially surplus of energy and nervousness. The emotional tension is translated into psychomotor activities such as tics, nail biting, or impulsive behavior. Surplus of energy can be observed. So it can look like ADHD a lot. And we see this in a lot of gifted children as well. So gifted children are often not the ones that are just know all the answers in the front row. Those it's nice, but it's not necessarily typical. It can have a lot of eccentricities, a lot of quirks, a lot of struggles and challenges that come emotionally and intellectually. Imaginational can be from frequent distraction, wandering attention, daydreaming. They can get scared easily because of this imagination. So there's a lot of things here that we don't always talk about with gifted children. I just thought it was interesting. I'm about to run out of time in this. So the last one just talks about how do we educate the special education. We can talk a little bit about that.